Grade school! What's going on, guys? Happy Friday morning to you. I am very excited to be with you guys. I'm a little cold this morning in Los Angeles. I don't know what the temperature is, but for us Angelinos who are used to it being 72 degrees with a slight breeze every day, it's like freezing to me. But I'm all layered up. I got some fresh coffee poured. We're gonna make it through grade school. I'm gonna soldier on through the bitter cold that I'm experiencing at this moment. I hope you guys are doing great. My buddy Rafa's here with me. What's going on, Rafa?
Hello, everyone. And here it's not as cold. In Spain, we always have like a very warm temperature, and that's not changing anytime soon.
Yeah, you guys keep it nice and balmy over there.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah. What is there like? Are you like? Is the sun shining today? Are you wearing linen today? Like, what's the vibe?
Well, it's somewhat around like 50 degrees Celsius, something like that.
Okay. And now comes the part where I admit, for all the math that I have had to master or at least get functionally knowledgeable about over the years, I still can't convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit in my head.
That's the trick. I don't either.
Yeah. Well, so we're basically doomed to never know what temperature the other person is experiencing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, I guess we can soldier on through that. Anyway, enough about that. I'm really excited about today's format. I hope you guys are excited about today's format. We're going to do something that I get asked about all the time that we just don't get to do all that much here on the channel. We're just going to grade up some shots in the context of a scene, in the context of a sort of put together edit, and look at how we can tackle a project kind of from zero and get some really nice looking images. So I'm super excited. This is the thing I'm most comfortable with. Put shots in front of me and let me grade them up. So we're going to have some fun together. I'm going to spend the first couple minutes here on this project just setting it up truly from zero and showing you how I'm going to go about that and starting to look at how I would like to treat the scene in question. And then we'll have plenty of time for your questions along the way as well. So it should be a really fun session. Get those questions ready, or better yet, just kind of watch and learn for a couple minutes, and then I'm sure you guys are going to have questions as we go along. Let's get into it. I'm going to switch over to my Resolve here, if I may. Oh, my troubles, my second screen troubles. I thought these were done with. I guess not. Hang tight one second. This gives a great opportunity to sip my coffee. Okay, let's try that again. So, I'm going to show you guys my Resolve. And we're going to take a look at what I've got here. So I've got a timeline of material that I've pulled in that is all from one shoot, one environment, one set of characters, not one environment necessarily, but one sort of narrative context. This is not a particularly artful edit that I've put together. This is just a string of shots from this environment, but it will give us an opportunity to look at things like matching and how we're going to create unique or aligned feeling between like the day exteriors that we're going to start with and the interiors that we're going to go to later. So we'll get the opportunity to kind of look at some of those considerations that come up when you're in the context of an actual scene or a commercial or whatever it is that you may be grading. And all I've got right now is a bunch of R3D files, and I've got an empty project that I haven't done anything in so far. So let's go through the first couple pieces. These are the things that I always do. This is the color management that I always use. We're going to go into our project settings, and I'm going to go to my color science under color management. We're going to go DaVinci YRGB color managed. No automatic color management. Going to go to custom. By the way, if I'm doing this too quickly for you, then you can check out DaVinci Wide Gamut Workflow Part 1 and see me go a little bit more slowly. This input color space is actually not even going to matter because I have R3D material that's going to automatically be mapped into my timeline color space. Timeline working luminance, I'm going to set to custom 10,000. Basically take the governor off. Let me go as fast as I want to in terms of my peak highlights. Output color space, Rec 709 Gamma 24. That's perfect. Input DRT, none. No need to tone map because I've got a nice high ceiling for the working space. Output DRT is going to be luminance mapping, like so. And then because this is a brand new project, I'm going to make sure I've got my LUT interpolation set to tetrahedral. This is something I don't know if we've discussed or discussed recently here in grade school. Do yourself a favor, guys. Anytime you are starting a new project, or better yet, when you are saving your template project, just go ahead and set this interpolation to tetrahedral. There is no reason for it ever to be in a trilinear mode. It's just an inferior way of applying a LUT to an image. So just always set that to tetrahedral. And then last thing I'm going to do here in my project settings for now is go to my general options and take this S-curve for contrast option and turn it off, because I actually don't want that on. I prefer to have it off. I prefer to get a linear response out of my contrast and pivot knob. And we've talked about that in the past, and I'm happy to recap it if you guys are curious about it today. So once I hit save here, I'm going to go from seeing a kind of like normalized looking image to an image that's going to feel normalized in a slightly different way. And actually, yeah, there we go. Took it a minute to update, but you can see still normalized, but the skin tone and everything is looking a little bit healthier. That's because I'm using Resolve Color Management to get out to Rec 709, where before I was looking at the sort of stock red debayer of this material, if that makes sense. So we've got our color management in place. Next, let's get our template node tree in place. I'm going to go to my toolbox, and I'm going to go to this tree power grade that I've saved. And this is just my good old-fashioned node tree that I use in all of my videos that we've been doing for the last year or so. You can check out my node tree video if you want to get more of an insight into why I do it this way, what this all means. But for now, I'm just going to grab this and apply it to actually every image in the timeline. So we got color management. We got a template node tree. Now we want to do my favorite part, quite possibly. We're going to get an overall look going on in these images. And this, of course, in a normal grading context, would be a matter of collaborating with my client and understanding what their vision is, what they want to see, and trying to give them a bit of my own take or feel or taste as well into the mix. But for today, it's just us. So we get to party. We get to do whatever we want. We can apply whatever look we feel like really serves this imagery. And when I look at these images, to be honest with you, I haven't spent a bunch of time with these images prior to our session today. But when I look at them, it's clearly depicting the tale of a deployed member of the military returning home. And the images themselves, just baked right in there, they have a sort of melancholy to them. It's not a super bright, cheery, happy story necessarily, even though there are warm moments like we see here in shot number 17. So based on that sort of like initial read of things, I'm going to go with a palette that allows me to explore kind of both sides of that, where I can push things into a warm vector if I want to, but where I'm not getting a hyper poppy, hyper contrasty, hyper happy feeling right out of the box, if that makes sense. And we could do that with any number of means. We could build a look here inside of Resolve, but because we're here live with Grade School, I don't have a bunch of time to go through and talk about look building and to dial in a look. That's something that happens all the time when I'm grading as well. I rarely have the luxury of like, hey, you've got 2 hours to do your look dev. It's usually, hey, time to start the session. Let's get started grading. So we're going to use my brand new Voyager LUT pack to quickly get an overall look in place. Now, if you're not ready to invest in a product like the Voyager LUT pack and you just want to get a sense for how an overall macro level creative transform, which is what a look is to me, it's a set of creative adjustments that do not change. If you want to get a sense for how that would work in a color managed context on your image, you're not ready to invest in a really high-end LUT pack like Voyager, what I recommend is grabbing my free 2383 LUT. And we could actually start with that today just to get a sense for one option for how to get a look on our image. So I'm just going to label this node look. And what I'm doing when I do look dev is I'm just going to quickly flip through my images and look at how this look is treating them. And so far, I'm really liking what I'm seeing. Like, this is looking really nice. I would say one thing that I'm seeing, especially in the interiors, is the contrast feels a little bit heavy. So I might want to tailor this LUT a little bit. I've got videos where I talk about how you can tailor and tune a particular look LUT to match your taste or your needs. So that's something you could do. You could get a really far way just with this 2383 LUT. But in my case, I want to take advantage of these brand new LUTs that I've just made that I'm such a fan of, and I'm just going to quickly go through and build a look with them, okay? So I'm going to start with a tone component. These Voyager LUTs, by the way, are built-in components, so they allow me to exert some creative intent and to come up with different looks for different projects, but to do so more quickly than I could do by hand, okay? So I'm going to start by building a tone foundation, and I think I want to look at Cygnus. This is one that I've been liking a lot. Maybe Orion would be another good option. Yeah, I'm going to say Orion. I'm going to label these as I go along. So this is going to be my tone foundation. Now I'm going to go upstream of that, and I'm going to put in a tone modifier. I think Alcor is probably going to be a great choice. See how those shadows are getting cool? And if I look at warmer scenes like this, my highlights are also getting a little bit warmer. You can see that in this image as well. And Alcor, I'm going to say I like, but I don't like the full strength of it. So after I label this, I'll say tone M for modifier. I'm just going to back off my key output gain to about a 0.65. Okay, so that's my tone modifier. And then I just want to quickly get some palette components in here. These are going to shape my overall hue remappings and densities. Basically, I'm doing a lot of what we were seeing in that 2383 LUT on a more sort of tunable custom basis. So let's go to palette. Let's look at foundation. And I'm just going to flip through some options here. I want to go to something with a nice healthy amount of skin tone. So let's look at Eris. That's kind of nice. That's like dropping my skin tone density a little bit. Mars, that's nice. That's just doing a different type of remapping. I'm going to say let's go with Mars. I just want to quickly look at how that's treating some of these other images. You guys can see as I'm building this look, I'm just going through and looking at how different images are affected by the adjustment. And this may feel, when you don't have a lot of time, like you're like, wow, you got to get into grading. Like, why are you spending all this time here? But what I'm going to get as a result of getting this dialed in is going to be well worth the time. And that's really an overall look that gets me an image that's closer to where I want to be before I even begin grading individual shots. Okay, so I've got this in place. I'm going to say this is my palette foundation. And we're almost home free. We're going to do one more ingredient now. Add a serial note. I'm going to go to my palette modifier. I already know what I want to use. Spoiler alert, my favorite modifier from my palette modifiers in the Voyager LUT pack is called Hyperion. And it's just going to saturate lower saturations and actually compress or desaturate higher saturations. So we're going to say this is my palette modifier. Okay, I've done that quite quickly. And like, again, you can see this shot's a better example where, like, if I take this full screen for you, you can see that that's kind of waking up the skin tone a little bit, even though when we're looking at shots like this one, the sky is really not being saturated a ton more, maybe a little bit, but it's a nice artful way of saturating things. And actually, just a judgment call, I'm going to scale that back to about 65% as well. And we're going to say that's my look. Now, I have gone quickly through that, but this is something that I exert intention and over, and I spend a little bit of time with, because again, as I said, it's going to give me a foundation, a baseline that allows me to work a lot less hard when I get into my shot level grading. Okay, so we've got a look in place. Now we're ready to begin doing some grading. And we're going to grade through first couple of these shots, and then we can pause and take some questions. So I've got my look in place. I really like how these images are feeling overall already. So I'm just going to start grading now. So I'm going to go into my individual nodes here. And let's just start by opening up our offset a little bit, like so. Let's go over to our ratio. I think that's feeling pretty good, to be honest with you. Gosh, I set my mic a little bit low. Give me one sec here. I'm going to need that left hand. I'm going to need that left hand. So, you know, maybe I'll play around with my contrast ratio a little bit, but overall, because I set my contrast to taste at the timeline level, that's feeling pretty good. Make one more adjustment here with my mic. And now we can go over to our balance, and this is where I'm going to use my scopes. We talked about scopes last week. Let me make sure you guys can see these. And when I look at my vector scope, in this case, that's really what I'm paying attention to. It feels, I'm confirming something that I was kind of visually seeing, which is that it feels like this image is skewing maybe just a hair green. So I'm just going to go to my offset once again and very, very gently just start to nudge it a little away from green. I'm going to be very careful when I'm doing this because you guys have heard me talk in the past about picking a miss. Like, what direction would you prefer to miss in between green and magenta? I think that's a really good thing for all colorists to have in mind. Like, what's your preferred miss? If you can't get it perfect, would you rather it be a hair green or a hair magenta? Me personally, I'd prefer it be a hair green. I really, really don't like magenta. I don't love excess green either, but I think it's the lesser of the two evils in the situation generally. So I'm being mindful of that as I work this balance. And I've actually nudged it further than I thought I had because I was just going in little slow increments. But that's starting to feel nicer to me. And this image is just starting on a pure feel basis to feel a little bit like it's got some life and some warmth, but it's also got some melancholy to it. And it's got a nice kind of like bluey feeling. Oh, and I really like getting a look at Mom's eyes when she lifts her gaze up here and sees what I assume to be Dad coming home. So that's really nice. And something that I would probably eventually do, maybe I would do it in the first pass, maybe not, is I'm going to go down to my secondaries branch down here. Let's turn this gallery off so you guys can see a little bit better, and even our clips as well. I'm going to try to keep this as visible for y'all as I can. I'm just going to do a circular power window here. And I'm going to go over here into this corner. And I'm just going to work my primaries and try to open things up in there just a little bit. So I'm working my lift. Let me go over to my primaries so you guys can see that somewhat. I'm just going to try to like open that zone up a little bit so it doesn't feel like so much of a black void. Okay, maybe that's too far, but that's a good start. Let's go to our next shot. So Dad's coming home. And what I'm going to do actually is let's go back to our prior and just grab a still so that I can wipe between these without having to continually be going back and forth. And really what I'm looking at, this is a good tip that I look at whenever I'm matching or flowing between shots. So like the cut here, that's important. Like I want that to feel good, like the actual moment of flowing from shot 1 to shot 2. But for me, what I kind of care more about is like eye lines, or not more, but I'd say just as much. Like I really care about this eye line where, you know, Dad is looking at now probably daughter approaching here, but just how do these images feel when we go from gaze to gaze? So like I'm going to go back to my first shot here and grab a still on that actually. And now let's go to Dad and grab our still on him. Obviously, they're not actually looking at each other, but I just want to see how these things feel. And so that's going to be the basis on here for adjusting on his exposure. And we're going to go over to our balance. And same kind of thing. In the vector scope and to my eye, we're skewing just a little greeny. And I'm just going to very gently tickle that over to the right. And I'm wiping. And what you'll often find is like away from green can mean more than one thing. Does that mean like towards magenta here, or does that mean like towards blue? And you kind of need to find your sweet spot there. So something like that is feeling pretty good. And this is also something that I'm going to use my scopes for. I kind of want to see these signal masses stacking up as I'm going from one to the other. Here's another thing that we've talked about here on the channel that I'm going to break out right now. I feel like I want to get a little bit more saturation in this image just because there's some nice saturation on the other side. I'm going to right click on my bottom node here and go to HSV. And then I'm just going to go to my gamma actually and gently push that up. We've got a whole video on that, or actually I forgot one important step. I need to go to my channels and turn off channel 1 and channel 3 like so. So now I'm getting just a little more saturation, nice filmic saturation out of the image. And if you want to understand more about what I'm doing there and how I'm deciding what to do, check out my cinematic saturation video that we did fairly recently. But when I wipe between these now, that's starting to feel really nice. Okay, we're getting kind of a vibe, a mood, a world. And again, something else that I love to do just for context and also for my own giggles is regularly we'll flip back to my timeline level and just see like, all right, that's where we were. That's your grade and color management without a look. And that's your look right there. So that look is doing a ton of lifting for me. And now we're into a fun situation. I'm going to turn my clips back on. Again, this is not like a tightly assembled edit. However, this is clearly meant to be a sort of detail, a punch in on this. So now the question becomes, all right, so we grab a still here and let's look at this single. And what I'm going to do for starters, often in a situation like this, is it's tempting to think about like what's different between these and how do I match them by hand so that this feels like that. But the thing that I'll start by asking about is what's the same between these things? And really the way that I'll go about that is to paste the grade that I did on shot number 2. Just see, does that bring me closer? Yep, it does. Exposure needs to come up a little bit more in this case. So I'm just going to go in and continue exposing up. Here's another place where I'm definitely looking at scopes as well as at the image because I'd like to see my kind of histogram levels align a bit more. And that's what this exposure adjustment is doing for me. You can see my bottom and my peak of my histogram are aligning a bit more. I'm not going to be like overly legalistic about it because this frame has a different context. It has a different background. There's no sky, but I am going to try to get those things better aligned like so. And I'm looking at the histogram and at the vector scope. Signal masses are stacking up pretty tidily, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. Let's just go over to this wide now. And from here, I'm going to wipe back to our detail of mom and daughter. Let's turn gallery off and clips off and see how we're feeling here. So in this case, we definitely want to expose up a little bit. We're going to want to come back on contrast a little bit. This is something pretty common, by the way. Generally, the further away you are from your subject, if you think in terms of being a cinematographer, where's a DP going to sneak in if they're looking at this image through the lens and they're like, oh, it feels kind of heavy underneath that awning. What are they going to do about it? And I guess they could, if that porch goes far enough off to the right, they could sneak some kind of soft source over there and diffuse it and try to pump it in from the right. But in general, they have far less flexibility to fill in and shape things when they're further away than they do when they're close. So what you're often going to find is that your contrast ratio gets a little bit heavier. You need a little bit more fill light when you are further away from your subject than when you are closer in. And that totally feels like the case here. Like if I look at this versus there, even after we expose up, which I'm going to do in my exposure node, like so, it just feels a little bit heavier. So I'm going to go now to my ratio node, and I'm going to work my contrast pivot and just try to kind of open things up down there in the bottom, like so. That's feeling better. Now, by the way, you might be looking at this image and going like, why aren't you balancing it? The balance is so off here compared to the medium. And you're absolutely right. That's my next stop. However, balance can often be kind of a blind alley, especially because we think about ourselves as colorists and we think about color grading so much. It's kind of a misnomer. The battle is really won or lost with your exposure and with your contrast. Balance will help you, but balance will not save you, if that makes sense. So what I've done right here is the foundation and the balance is the cherry on top. If I were to start with balancing this to match that, there would be no amount of balancing I could do to make the frames feel aligned because it's a fundamental problem of contrast and exposure. And remember, our eye is much more sensitive to contrast and exposure than it is to balance. So I always prioritize exposure and contrast. I won't say always. I try to prioritize contrast and exposure, even when my eye is telling me, hey, get in there and fix that balance. The balance is going to remain obvious to you and you're not going to forget to do it. The exposure and the contrast, meanwhile, are going to make that balance easier when you get to it. All right. So now that we've done that exposure and that ratio bit, and I feel like my histograms are lining up a little bit more and the overall sort of like openness and exposure of these frames feels a little bit more in alignment. Now I can go to my offset and do the same thing. Just start to tickle kind of to the northeast, if you will, like so. And again, it's very touchy. Like, do I want to be moving more toward magenta or more toward blue? But something like that is starting to feel like the right direction. And you probably, if you're like me, you didn't necessarily see my adjustment coming in as it was happening, but I'm actually making a big move now, right? And one of the things that I'm going to look at here for a little bit of guidance is like the white railing over here on the left compared to the white railing there. Those are feeling aligned. I think I've gone a little too far maybe with my balancing operation. So maybe that's a little bit closer. And I'm also going to look at like the wardrobe on my characters. So I think that's better. And something else that we might even do is like if I'm just looking at the exposure on them, you know, the lighting has also changed here. They're getting sun here. They're getting some kind of soft frontal source. They're not getting nearly as much of it here. So I could try driving up my exposure maybe a little bit more. And then what we can do down here in our lower node tree is just do a big, huge, soft thing. I mean, really big, really soft. Invert that node, go to your offset, and then drop it down like so. And you could play all day with like, what is the optimal shape here? But it's going to be something along those lines. And I have such a love-hate relationship with window outlines because they show you exactly what you need to see them, but they're also the exact thing that is going to distract you from knowing whether your adjustment is working. So I'm just going to go off of that and flip this off and on. And I think this needs to be even softer. And I promise I'll shut up in a minute and we'll see if we've got some questions that are stacking up. But I'm not going to lie, I'm just having fun. I really, really love this job, guys. It's really, really fun to shape images in this way. I'm going to turn off my window outline on my reference monitor so that I can get a feel for what this is doing just in the image. Actually, for a minute, let's just do this so that you guys can see along with me. No window outline. View, window outline off means that you don't see your window outlines at all. So that's starting to feel pretty credible to me. I might even want to go even like softer. It's pretty tough to go too soft with a power window in my opinion, But something like that is feeling like a good way to dig them out, but keep the weight of the environment more kind of where it belongs. And if we, again, wipe from one to the other, we're in pretty good shape here. And in fact, here's another thing that I'll say just in closing before I take a breather. If we look at, like I'm grading here because I'm assuming that there's more intention exerted on this frame and that there was more time spent lighting and getting this to look as the production team intended than in the wide. And it also happened to be the first shot in the timeline, so that was what we graded with. So we're now matching this to that. However, there's nothing in this that tells us what this stuff should look like, right? There's no rules about that. So I'm going to show you another trick that I love to use. I want to warm up this area outside of them. They look fine. I've balanced the image for them already. They look pretty good, but I want to try warming things up a little bit. And here's the twist I'm going to put on that. I've already dropped things down, and a good rule of thumb that I always try to use when I'm color grading is one node for one task, okay? So drop the surrounding area around my subject down. That's a task. If I want to do a new task, I want to use a new node, okay? So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a new serial node, and then I'm simply going to connect up the key channel from the prior node so I can keep working on this same window. And if I decide I want to soften the window or move it or change its shape, that's going to change for both of these nodes. So they're still connected, but now I can audition the adjustments separately. And now I'm just going to start to warm things up like so. Just a little bit. Off, on, wipe. The wipe still sells to me, and it may not even need as much as I just did. Maybe it's like literally just that much, that little kiss of warmth that feels a little better. And something else that we can do for getting a feeling for how we want that part of the frame to feel is we can go back over and look at the reverse on Dad here. And look at where is my sweet spot that I grabbed a moment ago. Let's grab a fresh still on that, go back over here, turn off our gallery, turn off our clips, and wipe. Okay, I buy that. Maybe we don't even need it at all. It just depends on your taste, but that's at least an option that I would be exploring. And in fact, I feel like I like it better off right now. So I'm going to leave it off. But that is a thing that I'll do quite a bit is look at windowing surroundings and knocking them down. And then if I want to, warming or cooling or adding magenta or adding green to that same shape, but doing it in a separate node so I can audition the adjustments separately like I just did. Let me shut up for a minute. Let me take a break. What questions we got, Rafa?
We have a ton of questions already. Let's tackle this one, for example. What's the matter with the option inside the resolve? Uses curve for contrast. Why is the logic of deactivating that?
Yeah, great question. So I'm just going to briefly cover that. There's no right or wrong answer to that, but let's just look at what that tool is doing for a moment. So to do that, I'm just going to create something right at the end of the node stack here. And I'm going to bypass all my color management for just a minute so that I can load up a grayscale ramp and we can audition the difference between linear and S-curve contrast. So right now, here's how my contrast is operating. It's just lift and gain in a particular ratio. When I move my pivot, it's more or less lift or gain. But that's all that it is. It's just linear contrast. When I go to S-curve for contrast, you're going to see that I'm going to get shape when I do that. My thinking there, my reasoning, is that if you think about what I've done thus far in this image, there's a lot of curvature. There's curvature happening in the color management. There's curvature happening here in my tone foundation and again in my tone modifier. And I want to have a quick and easy way in my grading system of accessing true linear contrast. And my preference for working contrast is contrast pivot as opposed to lift and gain. It's just personal preference. So because of that, I like to turn it off and get hard linear contrast that doesn't roll, that really pushes the code value straight down or straight up, because I know there's lots of rolling elements awaiting that graded image downstream. So I don't want to just mindlessly keep stacking rolling nonlinear contrast adjustments on top of each other. I want to know where the linear contrast is coming from and where the rolling contrast is coming from, and to balance those things, if that makes sense.
Also, a lot of people are wondering, why are you using offset instead of, for example, the tint slider and the temp slider?
Oh, good question. I'll give you the nuanced answer there is like, if you think about this node setup that I kind of consistently work out of here on the channel, I think it's a very sensible node setup. And I also think there's more than one go-to tool that you could elect for exposure, for ratio, for balance, for any of those things. The ones that I'm using aren't the only ones you could use. They're not even the only ones that I use, but I do like to pick one for a project and stick with it. And the reason for me, specifically why I'm really not using temp and tint anymore in my grading practice, is because as my understanding of color science has deepened, temp and tint, they their whole appeal to me when I did use them was that, oh, this is a way of like doing something more what we would call photometric, meaning something more along the lines of like making a change in camera to the sensitivity of the camera and making it sensitive more for daylight or more for tungsten or more for somewhere in between. And the more that I look at the color science that drives these knobs and at the task that they're even trying to do by implementing those tools, they're just best fits. They're just best guesses. They're just attempts at giving you a combination of red, green, and blue that feels like you're warming or cooling the image. So for me personally, I've come to the conclusion that I prefer to just have my hands on the wheel and to control it, because I've too often been in a situation with temperature and tint where I'm like, I'm just playing two arbitrary axes against each other. There's nothing wrong with that, but at a certain point I've come to feel like I just would prefer to have my hand on the ball and to tickle it in the right direction, as you were seeing just a moment ago. Like with these like little anti-green adjustments that I'm making, I feel more comfortable making that adjustment in my hand than I do by tuning temp and tint into the right position. That's a personal preference. That changes all the time, but that's kind of where my practice is at. And the other thing that I would mention in terms of choosing offset over something like maybe the global exposure, you could totally do that. You could elect to do global exposure in your HDR tools instead of your offset. And we actually talked about this in grade school recently. You could do global exposure, you could do linear gain, you could do offset in another gamma curve. Like if I did my exposure, for example, in ACES CC, which is a pure log curve, you're gonna see my shadows get denser when I do that. So there's different options that you can use for that. But for me, as a default position, I really encourage keeping it simple as possible. Work your offsets, work your trackballs, and let it bother you. Wait for something to annoy you, and then look for a solution that you feel like truly improves on whatever is bugging you. That's a really good recipe for anything you do in color grading. Start with the simplest possible thing, and then wait until you need something more complex, and then find and select the ideal tool to scratch that itch.
A question from Jim Robinson. Will you set black points and do overall exposure and then clip level exposure first before applying a load, or after?
For me, afterwards. I always want to grade in the creative context, in the context of the artful rendering of the image. So the order that I've done things in today is the exact order that I actually grade in. Color manage, get that overall look in place. When I'm doing the look dev, my only exception might be that, like, if there are a couple of shots that I want to see how they're going to feel and they happen to be aberrant from their neighbors, like super underexposed, I might very quickly flip over to a shot and just open up its exposure so that I can see how a properly graded version of that image will pass through my creative and technical pipeline. But other than that, it's pipeline first, including the creative components, and then shot level grading. And that's personal preference. And for me, it also harks back to like the way that color timers and filmmakers have operated for the majority of cinema history. There's no sort of separating in a film system like, well, show me the print, but without any of the preferential or creative characteristics. Just show me the neutral technical transform. There's no such thing. It's all one thing. And that's really how I think of it, is like this net of getting from camera to display before I begin grading. That's just one thing to me. It's a dynamic thing with different levers to it, but it's just one thing that until I have that thing completely built, I don't have the proper context to make my shot level grading decisions. That's my take anyway.
Another question regarding the tool you're using. Besides offset and the HDR tool, why don't you use the contrast in the HDR panel?
You know, that's a really good question. And I feel like a lot of the answers to my questions to today's questions are going to be maybe less satisfying or just not as good as the answers that I usually give here in grade school. The only answer I can really give you to that, like I can bore you with the color science details of how the contrast knob in the HDR tool differs from the contrast knob in the primaries. But the reality is, as a colorist, the reason I don't use the contrast knob in the HDR tool is because I don't like it. I don't like what it does to my image. I like what contrast pivot in my primaries does. So that doesn't mean that I'm the only person with the correct opinion on that. There's more than one opinion on that. But that's going to be my answer for a lot of these things, is because after spending a lot of time in Resolve, I like doing it this way as opposed to that way. Let's take like one or two more, and then I'm going to keep on grading here.
All right. Fun question here. Why would you not reduce contrast subtly outside your window in this shot?
Ooh, that is a fun question. I think that would be totally fair play. And in fact, here's where, kind of like the whole conversation about choosing your tools comes into play. You could look at like, okay, I've dropped things down and maybe now I want to open up my contrast as an additional measure. Or let's just try doing it another way here. I'm going to copy and paste this node so that we can look at an alternative approach. Let's actually wipe out here. I'm going to grab a still. So this is V1. Here's V2. What if instead of dropping everything outside of the window using offset, what if I dropped everything outside of the window using gain? Because that actually is in and of itself a contrast reduction. Offset is kind of a contrast reduction in the sense that like you have a floor to your image. So at a certain point you're dropping the ceiling, but the floor can't go any lower, if that makes sense. But offset, as you guys know, is moving the whole image in one piece, even if that piece is ultimately crashing through the floor and some of it is not visible anymore. Whereas gain is just moving the top closer to the floor. So gain is like a pure and immediate contrast reduction. And if we look at these two things, those are just different feelings. And could I have gotten to this by dropping offset and then reducing contrast? Yeah, probably. But this is also one of my favorite things to puzzle through as a colorist. Even if I'm not finding the perfect answer on the fly while I'm grading with clients, I like to think about things like that. Of like, well, the next time, instead of dropping offset and reducing contrast pivot, could I simply drop my gain? And would that get me similar results? And in this case, I really like what this is doing. And I think that's a great idea to say, hey, let's just drop our contrast outside of the shape. Maybe that's the better approach than to drop our offset, which, as we can see, is leaving more contrast in those areas of the image. Great idea. Actually, tell you what, let's put a pin in questions for now, and I'm going to grade a few more for us, and we can keep going. I'm actually going to keep that idea right in there. And let's wipe out this warming operation because I don't feel like I need it for the moment. And we're going to keep on going forward. Now, I'm just going to call out for a second here, guys. What's happening to me right now? This is one of my favorite things in color grading. There's some terminology that I mentioned in our mini grading course for the Voyager LUT pack last weekend for any of you guys who were there. Were any of you guys there? Any Voyager customers? Anybody who was in the mini grading course last week? Give me a shout in the chat. Let me know. We had a lot of fun. One of the things that I mentioned in there is a set of terminology that my friend Steve Yedlin has shared with me and that I'm openly stealing now. He talks about the emergent versus the deterministic aspects of a system, meaning the things that you know are going to happen ahead of time and the things that surprise you, the things that emerge when you're in the process. So I've set this look, and you guys saw I exerted some explicit control over the look when I set it. However, that look is going to continue to surprise me for the rest of this grade. And this is just one of those images where that's happening. I just think this is really freaking beautiful. Like, before I touch anything, I know I want to do more stuff, but like the color of the mountains back here against the brighter green here and the darker foliage there, and mom's blue jeans and mom's wardrobe here and our daughter's clothes and the skin tone, like this palette just feels great to me. And it is in huge part coming from this look, but it's not like before I applied this look, I had that taste in my mouth. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I had an idea of what I might get, but this is an emergent property of the system that I've built, and discovering those emergent things in the images as I'm going through. I've been doing this job for a long time, and that has only gotten more fun for me over the years. So just a side note about something I find particularly joyful about color grading. I'm going to expose up maybe just a little bit. Let's go to our ratio. I think we could soften out just a hair. Maybe something like that. Off, on, off, on. Turns out I landed right at a 1 basically by trying to judge my contrast, so I guess I'm happy with it. Happier than I thought. And if I just look at kind of how this evolves, you know, really the only thing that I would say here is like, okay, maybe we're feeling a little bit greeny, but more than anything, I just feel like I want to maintain that sort of like colorful, like appealing quality to the image and that slightly moodier quality. Like this is not a one note, super happy story, but I want to go ahead and max out my color separation. We talked about that a lot in our balance series that we worked through recently here on the channel. So to do that, that's going to be the basis on which I move my offset ball right now. And let me try to get you guys a view on the offset ball and on the image as I do this. I'm just going to kind of nudge northwest. I am warming the image up for sure, but I'm not really thinking about warming or cooling. I'm just thinking about maxing out the separation between, for example, those trees back behind Mom's head and Mom's skin. So you can see I'm starting to get some of that here. And that just feels really good. I really like color grading. It's such a fun job. I hope some of you guys are probably out there sitting like, this guy's stoned. This stuff looks terrible. What the hell is this idiot doing? Sorry if you don't like my taste. That's the fun thing about art and color grading is we can all have our own taste and there's room for it. And you don't have to love anything that I'm doing and you can think that I'm full of it. But hopefully a few of you guys are really digging this. I just think this is beautiful. And surprisingly, here's another like emergent versus deterministic thing that I'm just noticing as we're going through this. I just happen to be organically letting the image fall into a slightly more pinky vector than I might normally. And I just like it. Like Mom's skin tone, if I were to meter it right now, it's probably going to be sitting pretty true, but I'm going to guess that it's sitting just a hair on the magenta side. If I do a circular power window, let's in this case turn our outline back on like so. This is something that I do pretty regularly. I'm just going to choke this in and grab a little patch sample on like Mom's cheek and turn on my highlight mode and just see where that's vectoring. Yeah, so like the trace is pretty thin in my vector scope. You might not even be able to see it, but it's basically, it's pointing kind of toward red. It's like got a slight bow shape to it, but it's squarely on the right side of my skin tone line as opposed to on the skin tone line or off to the left. So that kind of goes against my grain that I was just talking about of picking your miss of missing green. And maybe, you know, like in my second pass, a big part of what I'm going to do in my second pass, which we won't do together here today, is I'm going to be backing off things that I did in the first pass. That's something that I'm looking to do. There's nothing I hate more in a second pass than going, nope, you dummy, you didn't go far enough. Push it further. I really don't like that. I want to get the problem surrounded. I want to be pushing things back where they came in the second pass, because then I have a field that I'm playing on. If you haven't gone too far, you don't know how far you need to go still, if that makes sense. It's like, you know, have I gone 5% of the distance to where I need to go? Have I gone 50% of the distance to where I need to go? As opposed to saying, no, I've gone 100 and I know that my sweet spot is somewhere in between here and here. I've got a definite range. I've got boundaries on either side. So that's a big goal for me in my first pass is I'd much, much rather go too far than not far enough. I hate going into a second pass and realizing like, oh man, I was being sheepish. I was being shy. I should have just gone for it because now I need to keep pushing. And then I'm going to need to come back to it in my third pass before I can see that I'm too far and then find that sweet spot, right? So that said, so far I happen to be landing in a rather kind of pinky magenta-ish vector that I just, in these images, I feel like it feels good. Again, you might think I'm stoned and call me crazy, but that's how I feel. And let's look at, you know, like again, as I'm looking at all these images here, you know, we're also dealing with daylight and available light. So this is where collaboration with a client is going to come in to say like, well, do you like how the image felt here? Or do you like how the image felt here 20 minutes later or so when the sun had really started to go down? Do you like that twilight thing? Because in the context of this story, I think it's pretty clear we're going to have to create some flow between these things. Since we're just going in shot order, I'm going to say that I'm going to go with like the time of day that we were getting more like around here. Okay. So in this case, time of day has changed. I'm not necessarily going to try and paste my work from prior nodes because I don't have a ton of confidence that it's really going to track. By the way, I'm going to just do another thing in my image scaling. I want to get this image to fill the frame. I don't know what how they were framing on set, but I'm just being distracted by those letterboxes a little bit. So exposure, let's open up. I'm going to be wiping back to my prior frame. Looking at let's go back to my histogram on my scopes here. Those are starting to line up. Vector scope's feeling pretty good. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Something doesn't feel great here. This one does actually feel a hair magenta as opposed to the more greeny bias that we've been picking up before. So I'm just nudging now off to the kind of like west-southwest, like so. This is one that's weird. Like, yeah, I'm being really sneaky with that, I guess. Let's move it. Another principle that I do try to remember for myself and especially for my clients is like, give yourself something to react to. Like, I know I've been talking about, you know, that oftentimes little adjustments is all that's needed and you want to be nuanced with what you're doing, but give yourself something to adjust to. If you can't see a clear difference with the before and after, don't ask yourself, and especially don't ask your client to see it. Like, do something that you can react to. Do something that is different enough that you can see it. And again, that's where kind of like that idea of going too far in the first pass comes into play. But this is feeling better to me when I look at the before and the after. Off, on. Here we go, full screen. Off, on. And if we wipe, yeah, those are feeling more like they're in the same world, right? His skin is feeling like maybe just slightly too ruddy to me, which I could try to solve with my balance by just trimming out a little bit of red now. Or I might, in my second pass, need to go in and do something like a hue versus sat and just trim a little bit of red out that way. Let me turn these scopes somewhere else for a moment. So you can see I'm grabbing on my control panel. You could, of course, just do this in Resolve. I'm just going to hue versus sat and grabbing that red preset and pulling it down ever so slightly. It really doesn't need much. A lot of these tools in Resolve were really designed to operate in like a display referred setting, or at least to work in both. So when you are scene referred, often a little nudge goes a very long way. So that's certainly the case here. And let's just look at like one more shot here on the outside, and then we're going to move inside. And you know, here's another fun thing, guys, like that is, I want to emphasize, because I feel like I got really upside down about this in my color grading practice. It's okay as you're working through a grade to be turned on by something that you're seeing and being like, wait, was this the vibe all along? Is like that too open and bright and boring? Did I need to be grading everything to this the whole time? That's totally okay to ask that question in the room, ask yourself, ask your client, and to answer, yeah, it might be. And then to go back and say, all right, second time around, we're going to line things up to this because this is beautiful. Like this like twilighty thing that's happening right now, I'm a big fan. So maybe I totally missed the mark from the beginning, but for now, I'm just going to say like, let's go with this vibe. Hell with the continuity. I'll solve it on the next pass. I'm going to open up just a little bit. I love like we're living down here in this kind of lower right, like skewing bluey, skewing indigo kind of color quadrant. And then I'm just going to work on my contrast ratio here. And this is an example where linear contrast is really not going to be my friend. And by the way, this is worth observing. When we talked about the S-curve for contrast thing, that only changes what happens with positive contrast, meaning a contrast value that is above 1. When you're doing negative contrast, that's always linear, no matter how that checkbox is set up. And in this case, like, I don't like the linearity of that contrast because I don't really want to lift my floor, as is kind of beginning to happen here. I really just want to fill things in. I want to slow down that descent into pure black. So I'm going to go down here. I could do this up in the top section or down in the bottom. I'm just going to kind of go by feel and go to the bottom. And I'm going to go to my custom curves. Here's another trick that I'll use all the time. I'm going to pull up a preset of my DaVinci Wide Gamut Gray. And I'm going to just use this to grab a sample of where mid-gray is sitting in my working space. Option clicking in my custom curve node here, like so. And then I'm going to wipe this out. That's all I needed it for. And now I'm just going to look at scooping out those very lower code values, but keeping the floor pinned. Okay, something like that. Maybe it's not quite there. Maybe it's more like this. and it's probably going to be too far no matter where I place it. So I'm going to then go in and back this off. I don't want to feel flat or lose contrast, but I just want to keep things alive, keep the flame burning as we're going down toward the floor as long as I possibly can. Really slow things down right there at the very end. Okay. So that's kind of the idea there. And wow, it's like a real color grading session. Me gabbing and grading along. I've completely lost track of time. Let me shut up for a second and we'll take some more questions.
All right. A question from John. Do you ever keyframe a shot, not to fix anything, but to introduce a mood into an scene?
Yeah, absolutely. That's obviously a spectrum. Like on one side is like just keyframing a shot to, as you said, fix something. And then on the other one would be purely just to introduce a flavor. And then you can have stuff in the middle all the time. I did a film earlier this year where it's available light, it's late afternoon, kind of similar to what we're seeing here. And there are these long oneers where there are a lot of 180s. So you'd be like facing the sun and then facing away from the sun. And there was, toward the end of the film, they had actually beautifully shot it, like almost Days of Heaven style, where they were meticulously planning the setup so that things would get a little darker and we'd move into twilight as the scene progressed. And of course, it needed help from the color grade to really finesse that vision. So one thing that I did at one point was I was like, all right, this shot lasts like 30 seconds. We've got some good real estate to play with here. But over the span of this 30 seconds, I need to move the sun like 10 minutes worth of sun, if that makes sense. So that was just a dynamic keyframed adjustment. And it takes a little bit to pitch, but I've got a really good very simple technique for keyframing adjustments like that. We talk about it in the Colorist Career Accelerator. I don't know if any of my CCA gang are here today. Hope you guys are. What's up, CCA gang? If not, the Colorist Career Accelerator is coming up in the spring. We're going to be making an announcement about that very soon. And if you like anything that you've seen today, anything that we've been talking about, and you want to get an even more structured sort of program that will walk you through how to develop a grading practice like the one that I'm showing you, definitely stay tuned for announcements about the Colorist Career Accelerator. We're going to be talking about it here on the channel. The very best way to stay in the loop is to grab one of my freebies that we're going to leave links for in the description for today's video. So that would be my 2383 LUT that we talked about, my exposure chart that we were just looking at, my mid-grade cheat sheet, these various tools that are going to help you in your grading practice anyway. They're also going to get you on my mailing list to make sure that you are the first to know when we start making announcements for my Colorist Career Accelerator coming up in the spring. We always do a limited number of seats for that course, so it's time sensitive and something that if you are serious about making that investment in your career, you're going to want to jump onto, because we've done it twice now. How many times have we done it, Rafa? Twice?
Yep.
Yeah, twice. Both times it's sold out, I believe, within 36 hours. So it is something that you'll want to jump on and be ready for when it comes. But regardless, yes, I definitely keyframe things and dynamically animate. The trick is just to find a repeatable, easy way to do that, that you know how to do so well, that's so simple, that you can do it even if you've got clients in the room waiting on you to build it right there.
All right, let's play devil's advocate for a moment. What if your client says after the first pass something like, I feel like this is going to look like a really good TV ad, but I would like to make it a little more cinematic. How would you approach that?
You know, that's a good question. I think like cinematic is one of those words that like carries a lot of like, it feels good coming off the tongue and it feels loaded with meaning, but it really doesn't have much meaning. It has meaning to me. It has meaning to Rafa. It has meaning to all of us in this room. The problem is that meaning isn't the same for any two of us, or at least it's not guaranteed to be the same. So in that situation, I'd say, okay, cool. Yeah, let's rethink exactly what we're doing here. When you think of the word cinematic, what does that mean to you? What are some movies that you think of? What are some images that you think of? Is there anything that you can think of that you've seen that you feel like really captures an aspect of what you would like to see in your image? I would just ask for specifics, because to me, I'm not really grading cinematic or anti-cinematic in any of what we've been doing thus far, or maybe better put, I'm always trying to participate in what I think of as the cinematic or the photochemical tradition, but that doesn't mean that my definition of cinematic aligns with my clients, and it doesn't need to. It's my job to play detective and be a good collaborator and get a better understanding of like, okay, cool, what does that mean to you? And let's bring that to life. Let's really, really embody what you are seeing or what you are not yet seeing in these images. So it's all in the details. If I get that note back in an email, I'm going to say, great, can I give you a call? Always want to talk about it. I want to learn a little bit more so that I can go in a specific direction as opposed to making a bunch of sort of preconceived assumptions based on my own ideas or my past experience.
Another question regarding the workflow. For example, here you're using read material in a raw format. Wouldn't it be better to change temp, tint, hues, or whatever in the raw settings instead of in a node?
Oh, that's a great question. So again, I'm going to give you guys a dirty, dirty secret that no one wants to hear. Your camera sensor, even this, I think this is a red, maybe a Monstro or something like that. This camera sensor only has one color temperature sensitivity. It's not dynamic. We think it's dynamic because we're promised in these raw controls, hey, look, you can change your color temperature. You can change your tint. But the reality is that's just doing a version of what Resolve does here in the HDR palette. It's just using color science to operate on a signal that was only captured once. It wasn't captured under 5 different color temperature settings, right? It's only captured one time. And all that is being done here is it's a field of color science known as chromatic adaptation. That's how you're producing temperature adjustments. So red would argue with me in the case of this material, and airy would argue with me if we were looking at airy material. But in my opinion, as not only a colorist, but a color scientist, there is no fundamental difference between temperature adjustment here in the raw tab versus temperature adjustment in the HDR zones palette or some other temperature adjustment that is reasonably scientifically sound in terms of how it's implemented, like the HDR temp and tint. It's all just best fits, best guesses, best alignments of the data to what the user asks for, but it's not a holy grail. And I feel like once I really got clear on that in my own mind that like, hey, if that gives you good results, you should use it. And if it doesn't give you good results, there's no sense in hiding behind, yeah, but it's accurate or it's what the camera would have seen. Who cares? Which again is why I've kind of reverted back to the way I started my career, which is like, hey, here's your 3 balls. They move in the direction of red, green, and blue. Manipulate them to get the image that you want. So that's my current take. Ask me in a year and it will probably have changed again, but that's my idea there. And let's just take a look before we answer more questions. I just want to grade a few more of these images in a bit of a different context. So we've talked about this twilighty thing, and you can see I sort of pasted my grade from this earlier shot where we're trying to fill in our shadows a little bit more. And that's really what I like to think about for these moodier images. A lot of the time my client is going to say like, no, I want it more open, and that's cool if they do. But my taste, if anyone asks my opinion, they don't always, but if they do, I'm going to say like, hey, let's let it live in the toe. Let's let it live down there, right? And all we're going to do, if that argument, if the client buys that and they're into it, my only goal from there is going to be to fill in and slow down that last little bit of descent into black as much as I possibly can. Lots of different ways to do that, but kind of like picking out that arbitrary mid-gray point and filling in below there is certainly one really good one. And same kind of thing is going to apply. At a certain point, I'm like, all right, am I expecting to be able to see any detail in his face? Like, yes, if I open up far enough, I know it's in the negative. But like in terms of what I realistically expect from this image and where I think this image is at its best, like nowhere near there. And likewise, like what am I going to slap a power window on him and open him up 2 full stops above the rest of the environment? I mean, maybe if I wanted to, but that generally wouldn't be my preference. So if I'm with a client, around here is probably where I'm going to start to call out like, yeah, we've probably gone far enough. And maybe that's already too far, you know? But something like that, I think, is starting to feel reasonable. And then we could also look at, again, using that HSV technique that I talked about in the cinematic saturation video and earlier today, where we're like, all right, opening things up that far, I've really lost a good bit of saturation, so I'm going to add that back in. And I'm actually getting some gamut tearing or clipping back there in the background of the image. I think we're actually exceeding the gamut boundary. Let me just see if I have my saturation compression turned on here at the timeline level. I assume that's actually on by default. So what I might do in that case to kind of deal with that, one simple thing you can do at the clip level is to check out your loom versus sat and just start to kind of like roll the saturation of your brighter things a little bit lower, like so. Or I'll go you one even better. I know this is a tangent, but it's kind of a fun one. We're going to do, this is sort of a fancy maneuver, but this, if it works, then you guys will love me. I'm going to flip this node just for this node into linear, okay? Actually, better yet, I'm going to flip it into Aces CC, okay? Now, in my Aces transform that I've just dropped onto this node, I'm going to set an input transform of Aces CC and an output transform of Aces CC, which very excitingly is going to net me a result of no change whatsoever thus far. Nothing's changing, right? But if I now go to my gamut compression and I turn on my reference gamut compression, no joy. It's something happening upstream. So this is a good example of something that I probably won't, maybe I'll call it out in the room with my client and try to solve it. More likely, because it's not like egregious, I'm going to put a marker down and I'm going to remember like, all right, once we're done with the session here, I got to go in there and figure out what's going on. And it may be kind of a wild chase before I figure out exactly how to solve it, but that's definitely not something I'm ever going to be okay with sending out the door in the final grade. That needs to be solved. And just to be clear, what I'm talking about is this tearing that you're seeing along the ridge line here. Okay. So something that comes up that has to be dealt with. So same kind of thing here. It's like, all right, where are you going to take this? And are you really expecting to get like a totally healthy, a lot of the time you get like, these low exposures are fun to talk about. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to go like 5 minutes over time here. But one of the things that comes up a lot with these lower exposures that you'll see with clients a lot is like, they'll almost like lose their nerve or they'll second guess what they did. It's like, this is what you exposed. Like, that's what you shot. Yeah, we're applying a look and there's a little bit of extra contrast coming in, but this is what you shot, So what I always try to remind my client, if this is how I feel, it's like, it's okay. Like, you shot an image that you meant to live in the toe. That's okay for it to live in the toe. Let's just make it live in there in the best way possible. But like, let's not hit the panic button and do that. Because like that comes up all the time, I feel like, where they're like, oh, just open it up, expose it. We're like trying to get back to dry land and be like, let's just get a totally normal, boring exposure. Like, if that's what you want to do, like I'm here to facilitate that and we'll make it look as good as we can. But I try to remind clients, or if I'm grading my own images, or if you're grading your own images, try to remind yourself to like dance with the one that brung you. Like, you made that choice on set. It's okay. Like, go with that choice. Make it the best version of itself instead of like hitting the eject button and trying to get back to like a dry land sort of normal image, like that's fine, but it's also pretty noisy. So I would say like somewhere is around here, that's plenty of opening of exposure and maybe softening out that contrast a little bit. And then maybe some noise reduction like we talked about earlier, or I guess now last year. I'm just going to go to my spatial noise reduction and add a little bit of that into the mix, just a hair. That's another good option for us there. And then let's just look at 2 more images here and then I'm going to shut up. I mean, here's the other fun part, something that we haven't really encountered yet today, but happens all the time when I'm grading. This just looks good. What do you want? It just looks good. If you got notes, you got ideas, you want to explore, you want to see what's in there, cool, I'm game. But that just looks good. And one of the things that I get as a benefit from that initial look setting exercise is I don't have a compulsion to do stuff. I am going to go back over to this node and grab this HSV saturator and just look at like, how far can we saturate? Because that deep blue is so pretty. Like, can we go further with it? Is that interesting? Maybe. But in general, like, I don't need to do stuff on a shot just to say that I did, because I've already got a great look in place that's already doing a ton. So if it looks good, move on. This image has its own vibe going on here. That one we're going to want to do some noise reduction on as well, ultimately. Oh, actually, that's me being too aggressive with my saturation, producing that noise. But this one just looks good as well, And let's just look at this shot as our closer. It's another one like, okay, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful to me. I also like, I'm skewing kind of greeny yellow in this case, but it's a different environment. It's a different moment. It's a different mood. I don't really care about aligning like to my skin tone line, for example. I might audition that just to see if I like it better. Like, oh, is that? I'll try to do my best version of that. So here's before and after. I'll do that a little more slowly here. Before, after. I don't know. Maybe I like that better, but like this one's living in kind of a more yellowy vector. And I happen to think it's sort of beautiful where it's at. So maybe I'll do this, or maybe I'll do some portion. Last thing I'll point out here, something like this when I'm like, all right, let's just see what it looks like balancing it out to normal. And I'll kind of narrate that as I'm doing it with my client. You can always go to your key output gain here, like I did on my LUTs at the beginning of our look setting exercise, and just cut it in half. You're like, all right, let's just do a little kiss of that. Just kind of keep it on the leash, keep it somewhat tethered to that skin tone line so that we don't have a huge matching problem or a huge kind of perceptual bump when we move on to the next scene or when we're coming into this from the prior scene, but also letting it be kind of its own thing and letting it live where it feels good, even if that's not necessarily in tight alignment with our scopes or whatever. I'm going to make a judgment call here, guys. I'm going to take like 5 minutes to answer a few more questions. If you got to bounce, no hard feelings. Sorry for going into OT today, but I'm just having fun. I feel like you guys are having fun. You guys are asking really good questions. So let's do 5 more minutes and answer a few more.
All right. How would you approach global revisions? Like, for example, if in this shot, someone asks like, all right, I need some more to deepen the blacks in the whole timeline, or the split toning is too aggressive. How would you tackle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that I would tackle definitely at the timeline level of the node graph. And I would look at that, like one of the things I like about these ProPack components that we are working with here today is they're very modular. So both of the things that you just called out, those are easily controlled. My tone foundation, that's where contrast is coming from. So if we're like, hey, Cullen, I love the first pass, but I have to say looking at it in net, it feels just a little too contrasty overall. I'll say, okay, great. Let's just back that off. If you guys can't tell, 65% is kind of a magic number for me. So 65% would be kind of where I would back that off to. Same thing with the split toning. Our split toning, the tone modifier is already at 65%, but if it's too strong, let's go to like 40%, something like that. So I would just key output gain the components that are driving those aspects of the look. It's really easy to do. It's a little more complex if you're not working with a modular set of well-built LUTs like this, but you can essentially do the same thing. I mean, we've talked about different methods of kind of like getting inside of and manipulating individual components of LUTs in other videos. So I would point you toward that, because once you know how to do them, they're not time consuming, but it will take a little while to walk you through them today. But the ideal solution for me, and this is why I built these LUTs, would be like, hey, have your components and mix, match, sub them in, pull them out, swap them out, scale them back as needed, and just be able to dynamically construct a look really fast, but that is also in your creative control as the author. So you're not just getting like, hey, here's Cullen's LUTs, here's what Cullen thinks looks good. You're getting your own sort of modular set of things that you can tune and adjust at the beginning and throughout a project.
Also, we have not talked about texture, but what if, for example, someone asks for grain in their footage, and also beyond grain, if a client asks you, for example, in this shot, I want to really pop the eyes of the actress, but not to light them up. How would you tackle that?
Yeah, a couple good questions that we can kind of wrap up on. So texture, number one, I feel the need to qualify so much of what I'm saying to you guys with like, I'm in less of a sort of instructive mode today of like, here is how color grading works, and more in a sort of like, here's how I work as an artist. So virtually none of what I've told you today is the only way to do things or the right way to do things. It's just the way that I like to do things that produces images that I like. But with that disclaimer in mind, I'll speak to texture first. Texture comes up all the time. It's something that I decided maybe 18 months ago not to offer anymore. I don't mean that I won't do it. I mean that I will not proactively bring up like, hey, what do you want to do about grain? If you want to do it, I'm going to let you bring it up because I personally don't care for film grain. I don't think it's, I think there are more nuanced, more aesthetically pleasing ways to get the feeling that we're looking for from grain, which is really like the feeling of a photochemical system. So I'm not going to proactively offer it up, but if you ask me for it, I'm going to give you something like this. I'm going to do it in a layer mixer. I actually put that into the wrong layer initially. We're going to do this in overlay mode. Down here in the film grain, we're going to do some kind of 35 mil generally, if you give me my preference, a lower grain if I can get it. And I'm going to say grain only. Okay, so now I'm just overlaying my grain full strength with the bottom or with the original image. And then down here in the bottom layer, I'm going to go to my blur and I'm going to blur things out just a little bit, like a 0.52 or a 0.51 on the blur radius there. And that's kind of my stock cocktail. And then up here, I'm simply going to pull back on my grain strength or even on my key output gain or my global blend to get that. I guess the global blend isn't the right choice there, or like the key output gain to get, you know, like I'm going to try to get as little of that as possible. And actually that one, I guess because of the composite mode, that doesn't work great either. So I would say focus on the grain strength as your sort of like lever for how strong you want that to be. And so that would be how I would approach that. I would do it upstream of any of my look components. So it's kind of like a little more baked into the image. And why is that happening that way? That's not what I want at all. Do I even know how to color grade? You guys are probably watching me right now like, you dummy, you're doing the silliest thing in the world, but I actually don't know what silly thing I am doing to produce a change in the image. I should really only be seeing that texture popping on. I guess that goes to show you how little I've been working with grain recently. How embarrassing. Anyway, it's going to be some kind of combination like that, or if you don't want to do the blur underneath, you could just do the introduction of the grain with just this single node. Really the only reason I was using that overlay is so I could blend the layer underneath. So you could do something like that. And then, gosh, there was one other, Rafa, remind me the other question that we wanted to talk, oh, popping the eyes. Or more localized adjustments like that. Honestly, that kind of goes well with the grain question. That's something that you're going to have to ask me for, and I'll give it to you and very happily give it to you, but I'm not going to proactively suggest unless I really feel like it's necessary. Like this shot's a great example. I love her eyes. I love like the color that we're getting out of them in our look when mom kind of lifts her gaze here. And if you ask me, I'll go in and pop them and we can track them and do a little bit more with them. But I'm not going to do it proactively because I expect my overall system and my look to pop the eyes for me, if that makes sense. Like if we go in here, like just take a look at our palette pieces, forget the contrast. Do you feel how much like those colors are waking up and playing against each other and how much more color contrast I'm getting there? Like I'm pretty damn happy with that. And if I wanted to do more sat, I could do that with that HSV node that we were looking at before. But when it comes to like windowing and popping those eyes, that's kind of a last resort that you got to pitch to me because it's a pain in the butt to do. It takes time to do. It takes even more time if you want it to feel truly seamless and undetectable. And there's usually better ways to go about it. Like one easy one that occurs to me just as we're thinking about it would be like, go to something like the color warper where I can use my HSV mode and look at where her eyes are living. Maybe go to a 12 or an 8 size on the color warper here. And then just look at like, what if I go in here and I grab one of these lower sat control points and try to saturate that. It may just be too low to saturate. I'm getting a little bit there, but not very much. That would be something else you could play around with, but I'll put it this way, like doing tightly tracked and tightly drawn power windows on stuff and then trying to make adjustments that are undetectable. That's not a super fun assignment for me. I can do it. I do it all the time, but it's not like my go-to method, if that makes sense. And I feel like we could keep talking for another hour, but I'm going to give everybody back your Friday morning and thank you all very much for joining. This was super fun. I would love to do this more often. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this one. I had a lot of fun. I learned a couple things from you guys, a couple great ideas and great questions that came in. And I hope you guys picked up at least one or two different ways of thinking about your color grading. Like I said today, none of this stuff is like, you got to do it this way and that way's wrong or vice versa. This is just some of the way that I like to approach the craft in my professional practice as one professional creative. So I hope you got a little bit of value out of it in that regard. Thank you very much to my buddy Rafa for joining me, for facilitating. Thanks to all of you guys for turning up, for making my Friday mornings fun. Every Friday morning that we hold grade school. Always a blast hanging out with you all. Hope you guys have an awesome weekend, an awesome week next week, and I'm going to see you guys all very soon. Take care.